Welcome to The Connecting Place with Andrea Fabry, making the connection between health and your environment. Now, here's your host, Andrea Fabry.
Today we're going to talk about buying or renting a home, an apartment, a condominium. What do you look for? How do you find a safe place? Now, if you're listening and have no history of wondering about environments, but you're just curious about, hey, what more about this subject, this program is for you. If you have been in a home that has impacted your health negatively, I have been there as well, and I understand how difficult it is to believe or hope that you'll find something that is safe. So with me today is my husband, Chris.
Hey,
Thank you for being
Andrea.
here.
Great to be here. You've been excited about doing this program.
I know, and we have been there, haven't we?
Yeah, we have, unfortunately, and yet fortunately for those who are listening. So you can learn from some of our mistakes and some of the things that we learned.
Well, to begin with, the overall question becomes, how in the world do I know if this place is going to be safe for myself and my family? And if you're renting, it's a little different than if you're planning to buy. Obviously, it's a very big commitment to buy a home. And to be honest, most home inspections don't cover everything that we ought to be covering. So it's really good to have your eyes open and be willing to go through the pain of asking a lot of questions, perhaps doing some testing. And the first place to start probably is looking for a history of water damage.
How do you do that?
Well, some states require this to be disclosed, many of them, and just ethically, they should disclose on whether or not there has been any type of mold history, flooding in the home or condominium. Anything like that should be disclosed. The reason you want to find out about history, because chances are they'll say, oh, it's fine. We fixed it 10 years ago. There's a history that is present in a home if there has been mold. Remediation can make things much better, but it doesn't necessarily bring it down to zero. There is something left simply because the way we build our homes is so complicated, and there's air ducts and central heating and cooling systems. So it's not a simple remediation. Definitely helps. But there are those listening who have been exposed to toxic mold who will be hypersensitive to small levels. So I would encourage you not to live in a home that has a history of mold remediation.
Have you ever walked into a house that you're thinking about buying and thought, outside and everything, oh, perfect location, perfect this, perfect that, and then you saw something and said, okay, next house?
Absolutely, but you are even better. What's so interesting is I feel like my body really is sensitive to mold, and I feel like yours is more sensitive to chemicals.
Yeah.
But when we were house hunting, explain what happened to that one house, remember?
No, I don't, but
one, where you found a place that still smelled like mold.
Yeah. Okay, they had a lot of plug-ins, and they had, burned a lot of candles, so that was kind of messing with me. But as I walked in, the very first place I walked in, I smelled mildew, mold. It was like, what in the world is right? And it's right in the entryway. And so we looked through the house. It was a gorgeous house and a lot of bedrooms. It would have been perfect for us in some ways. And we came back down that, as I recall, and asked, has there been any water damage in the house? And I think it was the realtor that was there. And she said, well, I'll check. And so she went on, called, and we looked some of the rest of the house. She came back. She said, yes, there was one place, and it was at the front door, just above the front door, but they fixed it, and it's fine now.
And Chris had spotted that, I didn't. I already knew because of the plugins. Plugins, the chemicals are so high, the levels are so high in plugins, it can be very difficult to bring those down. That's not necessarily a deal breaker, but for those with a history of mold illness, certainly that kind of history of water damage probably is a deal breaker. And these are the things that you have to know as you go in and you work with realtors and test homes and think about this is this healthy for me and my family? Don't worry about, well, most people would say this is fine. It's better to to border on caution. Ask questions, just like Chris did with the history of water damage. That had already been ruled out for us, though.
One of our daughters was looking at a casita, just a small little place to rent. And it was one of those things where it would have been perfect. The location was really good. It was kind of secluded. But as soon as you walked in, I sensed, oh, this is old. There's something going on with the air, and I couldn't figure it out. And so, the owner said, well, there's it's not a sump pump. It's the, what's the thing that's on the top?
I don't know.
The moisture, it blows air with moisture in it.
The humidifier? Your dehumidifier? No.
Not a humidifier. I'll think of it here in a minute. But she said it's on the top of, it's on the roof up there, but it hasn't worked for a long time, so we just turned it off. And thinking, that's probably what I'm picking up here.
Was it the swamp cooler?
The swamp cooler. It was a swamp cooler.
It was a swamp cooler, yeah.
And I was just thinking, no, I don't want to put her in this because you're going to be breathing this all the time. That's not to say that you can't use a swamp cooler, but one that's been there for 10 or 15 years that hasn't been used, I'm thinking no.
Absolutely. Some of the other things to look for in terms of potential mold problems would be the slope of the land. Is this home or dwelling higher than the surrounding land, or is it in a valley? Is it lower? Does the driveway go down? This we looked at quite a bit as we looked for homes. We were looking to be higher than the surroundings simply because the water will flow away from the home. The windows, how well sealed are they? The basement, is it finished, unfinished? This is hard to say as to whether one's better than the other. Unfinished basements, you can see more and be more vigilant than a finished basement.
You don't even want a basement, though, right?
Well, no, and this is the good thing about Arizona. You don't find a lot of basements. But unfortunately, people are living in parts of the country where that's just a given.
And many times I'll hear him say, I say, hey, you got a house with a basement? Yeah, it's got a little leak in the wall, but it's okay. And I was like, oh, I understand that you don't really want to deal with that because it's going to be costly with, whatever the reason is that there's seepage there. But you really got to deal with it. You got to figure that out before you go much further with it. And
don't hesitate to state your needs at the beginning if you're working with a realtor.
Yes.
Don't apologize for this. Chances are they're not familiar with some of these environmental illnesses and potential risks. That's okay. We're not commonly educated about this, but don't apologize. Mm-hmm. Be very specific with your needs. This is important to me. I'm looking at the plugins and the chemicals. I need full disclosure. I'm not going to stop until I get the right place that feels safe to me.
We had some friends in Indiana who were looking at a young family looking at a house, and it was a great deal. And you might want to talk about this. It's just a great deal. The only problem, Chris, was up in the attic when the guy crawled through to do the inspection, they found some mold up there. There was some old tile that was leaking, but it can be fixed. And I said, boy, with what you're telling me, with just starting out with that, I would move. I know it's a great deal. There's usually a reason it's a great deal, don't you think?
Oh, and again, this is the mistake we made with our home that proved to be so toxic for us. And that was, look at the potential. Look at the potential. Haven't we learned? We learned not to look at the potential. Look at what is. And that is a different way of house hunting.
That goes for marriage too, but that's another program.
You want to make sure the roof has the flashing, which is that thin sheet used to prevent water intrusion. You want to make sure the flashing's done correctly. It'd be best if there's no history of leaks. Make sure the overhangs go over those are small things that you want to ask and look for and rule out, potentially decide ahead of time what's going to be a deal breaker for me. Mostly I would encourage you to go with your gut instinct, but we'll talk about that. But in addition to water damage, you want to look at the chemicals used in the home, the plugins, the fragrances, the candles. A healthy house should smell like nothing. That's the bottom line. It should smell like outside. Is there opportunity for good ventilation? How high are the ceilings? How safe does this home feel to me? And this is what, before we talk about some of the electrical issues to look for, I do want to pause a moment and read a quote for you. And that is...
This pause brought to you by Andrea Faber.
Goethe wrote this back in whatever century.
Good old Wolfgang, right?
Yes. Human beings making proper use of their healthy senses are the most magnificent test instruments there are.
Let's read that again.
Human beings making proper use of their healthy senses are the most magnificent test instruments there are. So what we want to talk about is possible testing to see, is this home safe? And there are some things you can do. But in the end, don't push down your gut instinct. Now, this home that we're living in for the last 2 years, we had been house hunting, and it took a long time for us to get the courage to buy again, simply because of past trauma. And it was just,
it took a long time for me.
Well,
you were ready before I was.
A little bit, but I understood. We had a bad experience. We lost a lot in that. So I understand renting felt safer. We were okay, even though that house was just not a fit for us where we were renting for 5-6 years. But when we looked for a couple seasons, and when I came to this house, I walked upstairs, hardly looked around, and sat back down, and there was a chair. The house was empty, and I said, this is good. Remember that?
Yeah, I do. Because the realtor said, "What do you think?" And you said, I feel fine in here. I don't, I could live here.
Yeah. It was just this overall gut feeling that I hadn't had with any of the houses. It was always kind of like, well, maybe, like that. And this was, this is good. We hadn't done any testing. Now, you can do some dust sampling, the ERMI dust sample. And there's a HurtsMe, a less expensive version that looks for 5 types of molds that are toxic. You can do either one of those dust samples. What we did with this house was thermal image. We had a guy come out who has a thermal imaging camera, and these are readily available online for personal use as well. It can be an excellent tool when you're house hunting or apartment hunting. I want to emphasize this goes with apartments too. Because we thermal imaged an apartment for our kids before they moved in. So we thermal imaged it. It's looking for any changes behind the walls that indicate there's hidden moisture, and there was dry everywhere. So it kind of confirmed what that gut feeling was. Apartments are tough, obviously, because everyone's sharing plumbing, and you can't control whether the person above you or below you is vigilant about water damage, or how the landlord is going to handle this, or the rental agency. Apartments are very difficult, but that doesn't mean that you can't find one, but just know that all indoor environments, in a sense, are compromised simply because we seal them so tight in the way we build them, but some are more compromised than others. Just, again, keep your eyes open and listen to your gut instinct.
I don't know if this fits into here, but I think the construction of the home is really important. If you walk in and there's a window where you think, what in the world is that window doing there? And this door bangs into that door over there. There doesn't seem to be a rhyme or a reason in how they put this thing together. If you start seeing that, or, the wall doesn't go all the way together and they've kind of taped it, that type of thing.
I'm so glad you brought that up. And because and back to our home that was not a good fit for us and was, a huge loss and caused a lot of trauma for our family. That home, had we asked about the builder and taken note of even his personal life story, he didn't have a good reputation. He had a very poor reputation, in fact, and was known to take shortcuts. And
he would live in the house and work on it himself. And he couldn't he couldn't pay the plumber to come in. So I'll just do it myself. Well, we had no idea that,
right.
It just, and on the outside, everything looked fine. Everything looked like it was, quality materials and all of this. But then come to find out, after we'd been there a few years, we started to find out what was behind the walls and the shortcuts.
Yes. And honestly, you're right about just how much pride did this builder take in this work? Who did the work for him? How much hands-on did he have? Because we just want to close our eyes and believe, well, if it passed inspection, all is good. And I think most of us know by now, no, we have to take ownership of these decisions for our life because they do impact our health so readily. It's so valuable to take the time on the front end before you sign a lease or buy the home.
And sometimes when they're building tract homes, and not all of those are bad, but they're using, some will use substandard material, say in the wiring and some of the other places that they're doing drywall. They won't use the good material that they use in the model home. They scrimp on it. And so you just have to really look at that. And if you can't look at it, then get somebody with you who can see these things that sometimes I can't.
And don't apologize to an inspector either. Well, I really want you to look hard for any moisture problems. I want to know the roof in detail. Again, this is your decision. It's your life. It's your health. Quickly, I want to encourage our listeners to look at the location of the closest cell tower. This can be a health issue. It's stressful on the immune system, just like any toxicity, any sort of something that's really not natural that can just stress the immune system, and we need rest. That's what our homes are supposed to be, a refuge.
How far away?
It's hard to say. One of the best things is to just get a meter, a simple RF meter. I have those mentioned on my site. It takes time and then linked to. But they're readily available. But if you know you're several miles away, you're okay. But if it's a mile or less, it would be worth looking at the levels. If it's across the street, it could be a deal breaker because you're not going to get that to move. And there are ways you can shield and buffer, though. So that may or may not be a deal breaker, but it's something to consider. And are there any power lines on the property, high voltage power lines? If it's right there, that's not a positive thing, and a Gauss meter will tell you that. But just looking at it, looking at those power lines on the property, for me, that would be a deal breaker.
Tell people about the smart meter, Andrea.
Well, smart meters now they're rampant. There are many places. There's shielding, there's opting out. So again, just know that you really don't want a smart meter right on a bedroom wall, any sleeping area. That's primary. And again, you can shield, you can opt out. There are ways to deal with it. Just like everything else, do your homework. Don't apologize for asking hard questions.
And you went the way of getting an analog meter, right?
Yes, I fought for that, and it's a digitalized analog. It's a little complicated, but I fought with our utility for that, and I'm so glad I did. There's no question in my mind that less is more when it comes to the direction that we're headed. And as hard as it is to go countercultural, it's your life. It's your health.
You got to live with all of this, all of these choices. So bottom line, it sounds like you're saying one of the really helpful things here is to really trust your gut.
Yes.
To really, as you walk into a new place and you're deciding on this, how are you feeling as you're there? And sometimes you have to spend an amount of time. You can't go in and walk around 5 minutes, say, okay, we're good. You got to be there.
And don't apologize for that. I need to spend an hour here. I need to spend 2. Could I consider just, camping out for half a day if the house is vacant? But obviously not. But again, I need to come back. I need to feel what it's like when the windows are closed. Whatever you need, don't hesitate to ask. On a very small note, something that I wish I'd mentioned that Chris was always very good at, and that is check the toilet water tanks, because that can be an indication of a mold problem if there's black in those tanks. You did that quite a bit as we hunted.
Just lifting up the back of the tank and seeing if along the condensation there will be some water there, just to see if there's a line of black that's around there or if it's clean. You can also look at, now, a lot of times you'll walk into a house that's being sold and they've painted the walls or painted in the bathroom, where you'll see a lot of times discoloration. So you have to kind of look at that to see if there's any kind of trace of any mold, or if you push on the drywall and it's spongy rather than real tight, that's important. Or in the tile in the bathroom, you can see that. That's one of the first things I did. I'd go in the bathroom, pick off the toilet tank and look underneath that, and then look underneath all of the cabinets where there's a sink. And just to see how much discoloration is there down there. Do I get a musty smell from that? Because most of the times what you're going to find is water damage comes where there are pipes, and that's the main place where it's going to be. It's going to be in the kitchen or the bathrooms. Now, there are some times when you'll have a pipe burst in a wall, and you got to look for that as well. But that's a couple of things that you can do. And
look at the laundry room behind the washing machine if it's still there. All these sources of indoor plumbing you want to look hard at. And again, to repeat, do not apologize for being this proactive. Good for you that you are. We can actually teach realtors something by the way we look at homes, I believe.
And I don't think any realtor that really wants to, do their due diligence, they don't want to sell a house to somebody who's going to make them sick.
Right.
They want to. Now, there are some people that are probably unscrupulous, but most people don't. They want you to be happy. They want you to be healthy in your home. And so that's what they're there for.
Well, again, you're smart to be thinking this way, and I'm so glad that you were listening today.
You've been listening to The Connecting Place, making the connection between health and your environment. Join us again next time for The Connecting Place with Andrea Faber.